707 Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Ken Weaver.
Yeah, Brother Dan Mandis.
Along with Johnny B as well. Guys, I'm trying to figure out what's wrong with this whole bill thing with the guns and teaching responsibility for firearms in the schools. I'm trying to figure out what's wrong with it.
Yeah.
And I want Super Talk listeners to help me understand this.
Okay.
So I am trying to figure out what is it that the Democrats exactly have a problem with. So I'm going to ask folks if you can think of, or if you have an issue with what they're planning on teaching kids in schools, and we're going to get through this in a minute. Call us at 615-737-9986. Don't call us and tell us that you believe that it's a great thing. I want to know if you have a concern, because I try to look at both sides. I really, honestly, truly do. And I'm trying to figure out the downside to teaching kids about being responsible gun owners. Mm-hmm. Ken, play that audio from Gloria Johnson.
Okay, Gloria Johnson debating the bill with a supporter yesterday in the General Assembly.
If they have had gun violence in their family, they don't want their child to be triggered by a discussion like this in the classroom when they are not there to make sure their child is okay.
A parent's objection to that is entirely misplaced. It would be the equivalent, for example, of us saying to an Amish parent, because they prefer to ride in a horse and buggy, that their children shouldn't be trained on how to cross the street.
All right, so Gloria Johnson says that if a family has been impacted by gun violence, maybe they don't want to have their kids doing it. So what I would say to Gloria Johnson is, and maybe the Republicans, if a parent truly does not want their child to go through this training, well, then just get a waiver. And if the parents don't want their kids to go through it, then they don't have to go through it. But here's what they're teaching. This is what I don't get. This is what they're teaching. Safe storage of firearms. Safety related to firearms. How to avoid injury if a student finds a firearm. Never touch a found firearm, and to immediately notify an adult of the location of a found firearm. The bill requires the instruction be viewpoint neutral on political topics such as gun rights, gun violence, and the Second Amendment.
And no live firing of guns.
You know what I think Gloria Johnson's worry is? I think Gloria Johnson's worry is that, because we all know that Democrats abhor the Second Amendment, they hate firearms. I think that what their worry is that people will become more comfortable with firearms. And so as people become more comfortable with firearms generationally, if they start teaching this in the school, well, then that's going to mean more guns, perhaps, would be out there, because people are going to be learning how to responsibly deal with a firearm.
Well, and it goes, they don't want guns, period.
Right.
Democrats don't want guns, period.
One of the things that I'm a firm believer in firearms training. It's what I did at the Glock store. And you're right, Ken. You know, we were talking earlier in the broadcast. And
I should say some Democrats. Some Democrats, they like guns. But
yeah,
not the kind like Gloria Johnson.
No, definitely not. And so one of the things we were talking about this earlier, about how they've now arrested a second suspect charged in the Kansas City Super Bowl parade shooting, and how moronic it is. This guy's name is Lyndall Mays. And so apparently what happened, and this speaks to gun safety and gun responsibility. Lyndall Mays is sitting in a hospital bed right now. But you know why he is being charged? Because there was apparently some other dudes that were looking at him. They come up to him and they say, "You looking at me?" And Lyndall Mays says, "You looking at me?" And suddenly they pull out guns and they start shooting.
Yeah.
With 1 million people around.
Yeah, they were dissing each other.
And so I will say this about firearms training. One of the things that I really I really took away from my firearms training at the Glock store, for example. And no, this is not a commercial. This is part of my experience. Every time I fire that gun, it made me realize how responsible you need to be with that gun. How you just need to be, you need to know what you're doing. With great power like that comes great responsibility. And so that's part of what good gun training and good parenting is all about. And obviously that's not happening with the parents of, like, for example, this guy, Lyndell Mays, who is now, being charged with murder in the Super Bowl parade shooting along with another guy because they started shooting irresponsibly. And so that's what the Tennessee, in my opinion, that's what the Tennessee state legislature is trying to do. The Republicans are trying to say, let's teach kids about, by the way, the Second Amendment. So this is also could be considered a constitutional class as well. And so to me, this makes all the sense in the world.
Well, the bill says you cannot talk about the Second Amendment.
Can you talk about it from and that's a fair point. Can you talk about it from a constitutional standpoint? In other words, this is part of the Constitution. It's part of our rights. I guess you can't.
Out.
Yeah, I don't know either. But I guess that's beside the point. Bottom line is that to me, I think that what Gloria Johnson is saying as far as how she doesn't want this to be part of this curriculum, I just think it's silly. To me, it's not a good reason. So what I've asked people, okay, so if you can come up with, and you can be a conservative and say, this is my problem with this legislation. I'm all ears. I, for the life of me, cannot find anything wrong with wanting to teach kids what they want to teach about firearms and firearm safety. And they call it age-appropriate gun safety training for students, heading to a full House vote. And again, safe storage of firearms, safety relating to firearms, how to avoid injury if a student finds a firearm. Even if you have no interest in your kids ever owning a firearm, how to avoid injury if a student finds a firearm. So if your kid, even though you don't want your kid to have a gun, what happens if he finds a gun? He or she has to know what to do, right? To immediately notify an adult of the location of a found firearm. So we've opened up the phone lines. Tell me if you can think of something wrong with this legislation, because I can't. I told you that I believe what the Democrats are worried about, because they're falling all over themselves complaining about this, is that they don't want people to become more comfortable with guns, because that would mean more guns out there. But let me tell you something, friends. I will take a responsible gun owner any day of the week, instead of the guys that were out there in Kansas City at the Super Bowl parade just shooting at each other because they looked at each other. They were staring at each other. And all of a sudden they decide to pull out the guns and start shooting. So the point is, if you can teach some of these folks how to responsibly utilize a gun, and it starts at an early age, what in the world is the problem? Now, Brian is in Tennessee. Maybe Brian can tell me what is wrong with this legislation, because right now I can't think of anything. Brian, go ahead. Thanks for calling in.
Well, first of all, Dan, love the show, and hi to Ken, by the way. I love the show. Listening to it on my way to work. I'm all for the Second Amendment, but my problem is this: what about letting the parents teach the kids about how to use a gun and training them rather than letting the schools train them? That's the problem. You're taking the parents' rights to teach their children away from them. Let the parents teach them, not the school. I mean, I just think you're taking parents' rights away from them.
I think
what do you think,
Brian? I appreciate the call very much, and I also appreciate you listening to Super Talk and Nashville's Morning News and the kind words. I think that would be a valid point if they were involved in shooting guns. But this is a very basic safety course. And let's be honest. There's a lot of guns here in Middle Tennessee. There's a lot of guns in Tennessee. There's a lot of guns in the South. There's a lot of guns everywhere. So when it comes to safety, and I do get what Brian is saying, when it comes to gun safety, you don't know whether or not your kid's going to come across a gun or not. Do you know in my upbringing, my mom and my dad, they never told me about guns. When I told my mom in the last couple of years that that I was taking gun courses, she was like, "Really? Why in the world would you want to do that?" I mean, it was just like, well, because Mom, I'm in the South and I've always wanted to own a gun. I've always wanted to fire a gun. And I believe that it is something that you have to have some responsibility as far as training and all that kind of stuff goes. Rob is in Missouri on WTN. Hey, Rob, go ahead.
Well, having not read the legislation, I can't tell you what is wrong with it, but I can tell you why they're opposed to this class, because it will lead people to understand that they are lying to them. Guns are not evil. Guns are a tool. The more people learn about them and handle them, the more comfortable they will be. And that's the last thing they want.
Well, yeah, that's kind of what I was saying, Robin. You are absolutely right. The more comfortable people get with firearms, the more there's going to be guns out there. And by the way, when you take away that stigma, one of the things that when I took thank you very much, Rob, I appreciate it. When you take away that stigma, because when I noticed first time that I fired a gun, it wasn't at the Glock store. It was previous to that. But when I really started firing a gun and taking training, to me, the stigma or the fear of utilizing that gun was gone. And I really learned to hone my skills. And with that, I didn't have a fear. I don't know if I ever really had a fear of guns, but I'll tell you what I did have. I've always had, but it really did increase my respect for what the firearm is capable of. And so I agree with, what the previous caller said. I think Rob, out of Missouri, he's absolutely right. Scott is in Lebanon on WTN. Hey, Scott.
Hey, Dan. This is just a racist bill.
It's a racist bill.
Yeah, and if it's not a racist bill, it's a misogynistic bill. And if it's not that, it's a homophobic bill.
Oh, I got it. Okay.
I mean, this is you can't be you don't be trying to teach our kids something. I mean, if they need to be taught sexual education, that's okay. You teach them.
Scott, you're absolutely right. Point. I was going to say, Scott stole my thunder, but he's absolutely right, Scott. And I got to run, but I very much appreciate the point. Sex education. How many times have we heard, trans type stuff being taught in school? So there's all kinds of things that are being taught in schools. I mean, you've got all kinds of, books that are out there that parents disagree with. It goes to court and all of these other things. But you try to teach firearm safety and everybody freaks out. So that's actually a very good point from Scott there. And I don't know, but I don't know. That super text line is going crazy. So let's see. Chuck says a gun safety course may increase curiosity and lead to careless gun handling by kids who now think they are experts. All right, so let's go with that for a second. Chuck says a gun safety course may increase curiosity and lead to kids believing that they are experts. I don't know if that's true, because if you teach respect for the firearm, then I think that you could teach that respect and you could teach kids how to be careful with it. I think that's part of it. I think the kids who are, running around some of these cities and they're just shooting people because they looked at each other wrong, they were never taught to respect the gun. That's the whole point.